And I'm thinking about a human being, which is my son Joseph. And I told him, I say, I have 48 hours to put you to sleep. And I've been given 2 bottles of morphine. And because of the condition that this water have done to your body, I have to put you to sleep. And all the time he was telling me about the water, I didn't believe him. But at the end, I began to believe him. And I made a promise to him, if you will let me help you exit out of this life, I promise you that I will fight for justice.
Mama,
Promise you that I would fight for clean water. And he made me make him this promise on his bed. If I lay down, you're going to tell them that it was the water. And this is the most frustrating process. I can't be as healthy as I want to be healthy because this is the process that I have to go through. So normally what I'm cooking today will have to last a couple of days, 2 or 3 days. Because mentally, I can't do this every day. Then I got to use another half bottle of that big bottle. I have a turkey in here, so I'm gonna have to soak that turkey in some water, and that's another case by itself. So I can't put hot water in here. So when it comes out, you can only put cold.
And there's not much coming out.
And it's only cold.
Yeah.
And see how long that
This is the only setting that just, wow,
that's
that's crazy.
And if I want hot water, I will have to take this off. You can't boil the hot water because it might have lead in it and increase the lead. So, so this is supposed to just take the lead out. If it's any bacteria now, we'll never know. Because I don't trust the water. And it detox and cleans out everything, all filth and bacteria and anything. Any parasites, anything that's in the water. And it'll detox the meat. Filter does not get rid of bacteria, period. So if there's any bacteria, which they have told me that I had my water tested. So they said that somewhere I'm picking up about 3 different bacteria. They don't know what the bacteria, and nobody city doesn't care what the bacteria is. They're aware of it. I mentioned it 1,000 times. But, so I had to protect myself. Now what I have to do is detox this so I can cook it. So the peroxide, what the peroxide is going to do is take all the bacteria out of the water and all the blood out of the meat. You know, it's going to clean out the parasite. And you're going to see after a while, you're going to see all this stuff films up. And that's going to be your parasites and your different bacterials that's in your meat and your water probably. So I just have to let this sit, and then it'll suck and pull out all the infection. Most meat does have infection in it, so it'll take all the infection out of the meat and it'll purify the water. So this is a process all by itself. So what I'm doing, I'm getting ready to
There's breaking news out of Flint, where Governor Rick Snyder has appointed Mike Brown to succeed Ed Kurtz as emergency manager in the city. Brown replaces Kurtz, who will retire effectively on July 3rd. Brown was originally appointed as Flint's emergency manager under Public Act 4 of 2011. He was ineligible to serve in that position when the act was suspended in August of 2012. Brown has served as financial director under Kurtz. He'll resume duties as emergency manager on July 4th.
You got to understand, one of the most important things to understand in this Flint story is that state government was in control of Flint. Even though I was a city councilman, I didn't have any real power or decision-making ability. I bet nobody in the country has probably ever seen what's called an emergency manager order. They would send one man or woman or somebody in as an emergency manager, and they would take over control of the city. They would take over control of the city council and the mayor. And they could literally make pretty much all the decisions. But they was communicating back with the governor and the treasurer and others, and they would be here running the city. Those are the people who made some mistakes. And some of us believe that that political strategy of taking over our cities and government was unjust. We know it's unjust, and it was unjust because it was under the cloak of finances. But the state did kind of a reverse Robin Hood. We have what we call come to cities revenue sharing, state revenue sharing. They was taking $50 million from Flint and $300 million from Detroit, snatching revenue sharing, saying we've got a $700 million surplus up here at the state, creating us with deficits, and thus sending in an emergency manager. And it was happening in mostly the primarily black African-American populated cities that were primarily Democratic voting blocks: Flint, Detroit, Pontiac, Benton Harbor, Highland Park, so forth and so on. So when they decided to treat water from the Flint River with no corrosion control, fast forward, people are getting prosecuted for involuntary manslaughter and willful neglect of duty.
I just started seeing the disparities and how government really was failing us, and I didn't know what to do. I just knew something needed to be done to change it because I was just pissed off. I'm like, I've worked. I haven't been a welfare recipient. I've worked all of my life. I've owned businesses. I've paid taxes. I've given back, and now I need the help. And it's just not there. So it's 2008 or 9. I'm hearing little things about, local government. There were people trying to recall mayors, and I started hearing about emergency managers in the state, and just little warning signs and buzzes. by 2011, it was just like really on the news talking about water.
I always watched the news. I was always in tune to what was going on. It goes back to 2000. My husband at that time was working security at the water treatment plant. They were just kind of like reopening it. It had been vacant for a while, or at least to us, and then they hired security to come in, and my husband was one of the guards. And I would bring him lunch up there and different things when I could, when I had my days off. And he'd say, well, they're thinking about reopening this plant. I said, what?
No one was in favor of the move off of Detroit. There were political factions that drove us to take an interest in KWA, and I have yet to understand how it was that an emergency manager was assigned to Flint, Michigan, and a number of them were over time, to correct our finances when we were, $20-40 million in debt, and they were going to correct that indebtedness by committing us to $120 million in debt to the KWA. The math doesn't work for me.
Here's the Flint. Our moment, so I think we need a countdown from 3. 3, 2, 1.
The Flint politicians were like acting like it wasn't a sense of urgency to work out something with Detroit because this contract was ending. And that should have been a flag for us then. Like, the county and city and state were just like, screw you, Detroit. We're not trying to hear that. There's a plan that we have for Flint, and no matter what we have to do and who we have to bring along as collateral damage, we're gonna get this plan and carry it out. And that brings you to the Flint Water Crisis.
I lost him to pneumonia. He would wake up in the morning, his sinuses were dry, and we never drank tap water. We were together for 20 years. We never drank tap water, even when we lived in Flint Township. And for some reason, he decided to irrigate his sinuses with tap water. He would sniff that water. And of course, if he was sniffing it, not only did it go into his nose and sinuses, but he was inhaling it into his lungs. The day I took him I called the ambulance and followed the ambulance to McLaren, where he was admitted to emergency. I was driving home, and we had our third boil water advisory for my area in approximately 10 days. My heart sunk. I knew he wasn't coming home. I knew it. And, you know, I'm certain it was the water. We were not civilly joined, even though we spent 20 years together. There's no recourse for me, even if it was the water and it was documented. But there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that sniffing that corrupted water is what created the pneumonia that took his life.
I was so naive back in 2011 because even though I'm kind of hearing little whispers about water and water contracts ending, I'm thinking to myself, I live in Michigan, I live in the Great Lakes. We'll never have a problem with water. We could just go a mile or two up. We got all the water we need. I didn't realize how water works. I guess I just thought I could go and put a pipe in Port Huron and turn the switch on and we would have water, because that's kind of how they were portraying it to us.
If you are an expert cake baker, and you know you got to put in flour, sugar, milk, eggs, baking soda, and you purposely don't put in that ingredient, you can be held negligent and liable for not baking the cake like you know it should, or in this case, treating water with things you know it should be treated before you dispense it out to 100,000 people to consume and drink. We believe people have died Legionnaire's disease and pneumonia and other germs and bacteria because of the way people intentionally and negligently refuse to properly treat water in order to try to save some money.
You have to remember that when the emergency manager was assigned to Flint, my understanding their direct report was the governor of Michigan, not the people of Flint. We had a city council in place. They could vote on anything they wanted to. But without the emergency manager agreeing to it, it did not happen.
Well, as the emergency manager appointed to Flint in, I think it was 2013, it was my responsibility to oversee the decision that had been made regarding the transfer from Flint from DWSD to the Carigani water system. That plan was already in place when I got there. In fact, it was a local decision, which was a condition made by the county drain commissioner at that time in order for them to be a part of the new system. But I don't want to focus on what happened back in 2013. I think it's important that we mobilize all resources that we can to fix the problem.
The last emergency manager in place was Darnell Early, and I just recently read that he is not the one that signed the contract for the switch. I've kind of looked at Darnell Early's career, and he's kind of like Teflon. They've moved him every time he got in trouble wherever they assigned him. So I suspect Darnell Early is not going to be held responsible for this debacle, even though he was the emergency manager in place, but not the emergency manager that signed the contract for the switch.
I think in retrospect, if we all had, 20/20 hindsight, we'd do a lot of things different. But I think it was important at the time to make sure that the people of Flint had a water source because the 50-year contract with DWSD had terminated.
I'm having a hard time understanding where democracy is when the citizens of Michigan, not just Flint, voted out the initial emergency manager law. And our governor immediately had a law written to replace the emergency manager law, and it was irrevocable. The citizens could not vote his law out. We're self-rule.
I think one of the things we have to figure out as a community is whose test are we going to trust? And I'll tell you whose test I trust. When the water treatment staff sample in 8 sites throughout the city on a quarterly basis and send it to the Department of Environmental Quality, not knowing what those results are going to be, and then they come back to us and say your TTHM level is about, 0.25 or 0.025 depending on your scale, and that's about where Detroit's water is in their quarterly tests, then I say they're comparable. Now, if you don't believe that particular test, that's your prerogative. This is a democracy. And it may be that we need to find a Michigan State University or some other entity that people are prepared to trust.
How is this democracy?
Well, it's as much as we have for now.
But that was an unintended consequence, and hopefully we can move forward and do what's best for the people of the city of Flint.
I really noticed the switch was during that summer. I started losing hair, and I was like, well, maybe I'm just getting old. I didn't even look at the water.
I used to chew ice, and I was like chewing the ice and like, this isn't tasting right. It had like I could like taste chemicals or something. I was like, it was like detergent or something in it. And that was the first time that I noticed that something was wrong.
I was getting these rashes, these strange rashes. And my kids, I was the one that was home the most. My kids were always off with their friends or at school. So I was the one being the most affected in our household because I was at home all the time.
I just started not feeling well. The job I had at the time, I worked 10 hours, 12-hour days, but it was still like, I was so tired. I'm like, something's not right with my body.
I felt the physical effects without even blaming the water. I kept going to my doctor. And, they were like, well, maybe it's dermatitis, maybe it's this, and they would throw creams at me.
And then I would notice that my hair was thinning out. It was like, One day I had like a head full of hair. The next day I went to get my hair done and most of my hair was left in the sink. Like, what the heck happened?
It wasn't until my youngest daughter, started losing hair. I was brushing her hair for school that I was like, this ain't normal, because it couldn't be age with her, you know?
So it was like little flags like that were happening, but the narrative on TV was like, boil your water, water advisories, here and there, the water's fine, just flushing the pipes. Bunch of BS. They knew the whole time.
So that's when kind of, my alarm kind of went off internally, going, some environmentally around us must be going on. But I didn't want to be a conspiracy theorist. I didn't want to sound crazy to anybody.
I was getting even more conflicting information because of where I was living. We were told that it was Flint Township and that we didn't have Flint water and there was nothing to worry about. But I'm like, I'm not crazy.
One afternoon, I was like, it was like 5 o'clock, the 5 o'clock news came on, which was the early news that hardly anybody ever catches.
By that time, of course, you're hearing people out in public, grocery store, doctor's offices talking about, yeah, I turned my water on this morning and it was this color or that color, or it smelled funny. So just the educated guess, okay, something's wrong with the water, but we don't know what's wrong with the water.
I caught the story of the truck and bus area, or the plant that's over there off of Vance Lake. They were thinking about switching their water source because the parts that they were making for GM was corroding. And I was like, oh my God, I knew.
I am a lifelong native of Flint, so I've been here for 35 years. So my parents actually migrated from the South. My mom is from Arkansas and my father was from Louisiana. So they were here probably about, I would say about 60 years at least.
For much of the 20th century, the city of Flint, Michigan, about an hour's drive north of Detroit, was at the center of General Motors' vast industrial empire, the largest and most profitable corporation in the world. At its peak in 1978, nearly 90,000 workers labored in the city's engine, stamping, and assembly plants, churning out Buicks, Chevrolets, and GM trucks and buses. GM's local payroll was over $2 billion, and the living standards won by auto workers gave the city the highest per capita income in the nation.
I just remember a city that was thriving, and then all of a sudden you start to see the trajectory change. I remember when they pulled out because you just started to see even the morale of the people, because we were a city so invested and we thrived off of the industrial businesses. People kind of lived their life planning and depending on a GM. People worked and retired from there. So you just kind of knew, for some people, okay, I'm gonna get a referral, all things will be well, you get overtime, and I don't think we considered what would happen if a GM pulled out, because that just wasn't something that you planned on seeing, because they'd been in our community for so long.
I mean, it's just like any other city or town when the number one employer pulls out and says, we're leaving by the end of the month, or today is your last day. It's devastating. It was almost like you didn't recognize the city anymore after GM left. The neighborhoods that when you were growing up, you used to say, oh, when I get older, I want to live there. Those neighborhoods now are like Blight City, abandoned homes. You have blocks where people who were working class folk lost their jobs and could no longer afford their mortgage or their taxes or their extremely high water bills. And they literally just got up and left. You can go in some of these homes that are abandoned and they still have furniture and dishes, and it's just like the people just took what they could, I guess, in their car as far as their clothes and some pictures and left. And it's like, wow, you walk into these houses and it's so eerie because it's like, you know, a family is supposed to be here because they have like a couch and chair, table, and pictures and mail, and they're gone. And it's just, it really was devastating to the city. It left our city. It's just a shell of itself of what it was 20, 25 years ago.
Threatened by a hostile police force and constantly watched by company spies, the union organizers were forced to hold secret meetings. Slowly, they built a core of men they could trust.
The break came one day in December. Workers at the Fisher body plant punched in as usual. An ordinary day. Then something happened. Or rather, nothing happened. Nothing moved. The workers had sat down. They would not work, and they would stay in the factory until General Motors signed a contract with their union.
When they tie a can to a union man,
sit down, sit down.
When they give him the sack, they'll take him back.
Sit down, sit down, sit down, just take a seat. Sit down and rest your feet. Sit down, you gotta be. Sit down, sit down.
When they smile and say, no raise in pay.
Sit down,
sit down. When you want the boss to come across, sit down, sit down.
Sit down, just take a seat. Sit down and rest your feet. Sit down, you gotta be. Sit down, sit down.
But I'll wear a smile, 'cause in a little while my path will be roses. The rain may fall from up above, but I won't stop, 'cause the ones I love will be waiting at the end of the...
I've always been a person that pays attention to the money and how it moves and how it impacts the community. Before I understood economics, I just paid attention to that. So you all of a sudden see families that were financially, or what appeared to be financially stable, you now see them struggling.
Well, at the time, I represented about 9,600 laid off GM UAW workers. I represented the largest amount of laid off workers in the United States at the time. Flint had about 80,000 UAW GM workers at one point. And that means each week, because we got paid every week, my check averaged $1,200, $1,400, $900, $1,800. I worked 1 week and brought home a check after taxes of about $4,300. We provided good incomes, our kids through college, pensions, but it went from 80,000 General Motors UAW workers checks dropping every week to 8,000. So we're at about 8,000 right now. We lost about 72,000 workers. We had about 11 plants in the immediate Flint area. Now we're down to 3. So we lost about 8 plants and about 72,000 paychecks.
When people say GM left Flint, I think it's a misnomer. I mean, truly, they're not present here. But with the shifts in the global economy, a lot of those things happened to Flint without GM actually taking a hand in it. Now, when you come to the water crisis, GM, quit buying Flint water because it wasn't properly treated. And so, in that respect, people could say that GM turned away from from us, and that was in more modern times. I'm not exempting GM from responsibility, but I think that it needs to be looked at differently.
Next time on how to celebrate Thanksgiving without clean water.
Can I get some water?
We figure who else could we ask? The leader of the free world, you know? Obama.
I can't trust it because when I drink that water, I see my son death in it.
Once again, the government lied to us.
We don't have a Superman. We don't have Wonder Woman. They're not coming in here to save us. The community is going to have to save itself.
Can I get some water? Come on up here.